Hey guys, hope you're having a good Friday. Today is lesson 5 of classification of animals. We're going to learn about amphibians from water to land. So, if you remember, we have our mnemonic device that helps us remember our different groups of animals. All my best friends represent vertebrates, right? A for amphibians, M for mammals, B for birds, F for fish, R for reptiles, and V for vertebrates. We learned yesterday that fish are aquatic, cold-blooded, breathe using gills, are able to move through the water using their fins and tails, and most of them reproduce by spawning eggs. A little bit of what we learned about fish yesterday. In today's Read Aloud, you'll learn more about another group of animals, amphibians. The word amphibian means living two lives or living in two worlds. Predict what you think this means as it pertains to the amphibians animal group. Why would their name mean living two lives or living in two worlds? How are they living two lives? What do you think? Well, we'll see if you're correct. Some words that you will find in our Read Aloud today. Amphibians is a noun, a group of animals that are cold-blooded, live in water and on land, and lay eggs, most of which have moist skin. We also have the word dormant, which is an adjective, existing in a state of rest or inactivity. We have the word evolved, which is a verb. It developed gradually over a long period of time. Fluctuates, which is a verb which means shifts back and forth. Morph, which is also a verb to change form. Shed, also a verb to drop, cast off, or separate from something. Transformation, a noun, changing appearance. Wetlands is a noun, land that has moist soil and is covered with shallow water. All right, I'm back, everybody, and today I've brought some excellent slides of Tabitha toad and Polo piranha to show you so we can compare how scientists classify them in the taxonomy of animals. Tabitha is not a fish, but she and Polo are similar in many ways. It's true that Tabitha and Polo don't look very much alike, but as the saying goes, you can't judge a book by its cover. What do you think that means? You can't judge a book by its cover. It's a saying that people say, right? We don't want to judge something by what it looks like, right? We need to know what's on the inside, not just what's on the cover. When classifying animals, scientists often search for similarities as well as differences. One similarity between Tabitha and Polo is that, as you know, they are both members of the animal kingdom. You've learned that scientists classify animals as cold-blooded or warm-blooded. Does anyone know which category Tabitha belongs? Do you think that her body maintains a constant internal temperature like yours, or does her temperature adjust to her surroundings like a fish does? Yes, her body temperature fluctuates, which means it changes. So she is classified as a cold-blooded animal like Polo. That's another way that they are similar to one another. They are both animals and they are both cold-blooded. Now take a closer look at Tabitha toad. Can you tell just by looking at her whether she is cold-blooded or warm-blooded? No, but once you learn a bit more about her habits, you will understand how scientists determined that she is cold-blooded. You know that scientists also classify animals according to whether or not they have backbones. Think about what you are learning about Tabitha's backbone. What you learned. Yes, there it is. Just like you and Polo, Tabitha has vertebrae, a column of bones all down her back. Who remembers what scientists call animals with backbones? Yes, they're vertebrates. So Polo and Tabitha are both cold-blooded vertebrates. Does anyone remember any other fish characteristics? What did we learn about fish yesterday? Good answers. Make a prediction about which characteristics Tabitha shares with Polo. Do Tabitha and other toads have gills, scales, or fins? Do they lay eggs or live in water? These are rather tricky questions because toads belong to a group of animals that change during their lifetime. Their bodies change, their habits change, and their habitats change. I'm going to share lots of information with you today, so get ready for some miraculous surprises. Before we go any further, I want to introduce the name of Tabitha Toad's group of animals. Some of you may know it already. How do scientists classify toads? Yes, they are members of a class of animals known as amphibians. Most amphibians spend part of their lives in water and part on land. Who remembers what the word amphibian literally means? The word amphibian literally means it actually means living two lives or living in two worlds. Were your predictions correct about how the meaning of the word amphibians relates to the animal? Toads love the water. Like all amphibians, Tabitha began her life as an aquatic animal living in water. She spends most of her time on dry land now. In fact, she loves the woodlands, but every spring she makes her way to a small freshwater pond in the wetlands to lay her eggs. That's why Tabitha was in the wetlands when I took this picture of her. Just before I took this picture, she laid a few thousand eggs in the shallow water. Toads must lay their eggs in water because their soft jelly-like coverings can easily dry out in the air. Come and see. Look at all those eggs. Like fish, amphibians reproduce by spawning. A male toad fertilized these eggs after the female deposited them in the water. So many of them will hatch into larvae, just like fish eggs do. But most of the eggs will never hatch. Can anyone think of why this is so? Why would so many of those eggs not be able to hatch? There are many ways that eggs can be destroyed: by becoming a tasty meal for a predator, being washed away in a flood, or drying up if there's not enough rain. The small percentage of eggs that do hatch will move on to the next stage of development. This is the larvae stage of most frogs, toads, and salamanders. We call them tadpoles. Tadpoles have gills, just like fish, and use their gills to breathe underwater. They are herbivores and eat tiny aquatic plants, but they're in constant danger because other fish can swallow them whole. Most tadpoles don't survive, but those that do survive undergo a miraculous change. They morph or change into very different looking creatures with very different habits. This transformation process of changing appearance from one stage to another is called metamorphosis. Notice how the word morph is part of the word metamorphosis. What other animals do we know that morph? Caterpillars morph into butterflies or moths. As tadpoles grow, skin begins to cover their gills and they grow lungs so that they are able to breathe air on land. Tiny legs appear. They begin to look more like land creatures as their tails disappear. Several species of frogs that live in the wet tropical rainforests skip this tadpole stage. Their eggs hatch in the younger miniature versions of the adult frogs. The Serenum toad's eggs develop in pores on the adult's back until they emerge fully developed. It's really interesting. The eggs grow on their back. Those amphibians that survive to adulthood will be hopping and crawling around on land, searching for food, just like Tabitha. Plant life will no longer interest them. Instead, they'll snatch up bugs, worms, spiders, and slugs with their sticky tongues. Most adult amphibians are carnivores. Some of the toad's larger relatives, like bullfrogs, even eat small mammals and birds. The world's biggest frog is the West African Goliath frog. It is the size of a pet cat and eats other frogs, baby crabs, and even snakes. Wow. Frogs and toads are the largest group of amphibians. Because they have so many of the same characteristics, many people have a difficult time telling them apart. The main difference between them is that toad skin is a bit drier than frog skin. Remember that although together they make up the largest group of amphibians, they are not the only group of amphibians. In order to study amphibians better, scientists classify them into three separate groups. Have you ever seen a salamander? Scientists classify salamanders and their close relatives newts as a second separate category of amphibians. Perhaps you've seen these four-legged tailed animals while hiking in the woods or even in your own backyard. Sometimes salamanders are confused with lizards, but salamanders are amphibians. Lizards belong to another group of animals that we'll talk about another day. Skin is one of the amphibian's most important organs. Tabitha and other toads like her have skin that is dry and leathery. Other amphibians have slimy skin because their skin needs to stay moist in order for them to breathe. Amphibians use their lungs to breathe on land, but also draw oxygen in through their skin. In order for this process to work properly, the skin of most amphibians must be kept moist. A word of caution here. When you handle frogs and salamanders, be sure to keep the animals moist so that their skin doesn't dry out. Otherwise, it would be hard for them to get the oxygen they need. In order to stay wet, amphibians will hop into water or crawl beneath a moist log. Most frogs, toads, and salamanders molt or shed their skins, often eating their own skins for extra nutrients once they are shed. Ew, that is gross. The third and smallest group of amphibians lives deep underground. Oh, these are really weird looking. Look at this picture and see if you recognize them. What do you see? They do look like earthworms, don't they? But earthworms are not amphibians, right? We've learned that they're invertebrates. Rather, these tube-like creatures, not nearly as common as earthworms, belong to a group of amphibians known as caecilians, or slow worms. They look a bit like other amphibians, only without legs. They need very wet conditions and live in tropical or warm climates only. These interesting animals range in size from only about 5 inches to more than 5 feet long. It's almost as long as I am tall. Wow. They have very sharp teeth and large jaws. And guess what? Caecilians have 2 lungs. These legless pattern breakers live most of their lives underground, coming up only occasionally to feed. So interesting. Look at these ancient fish, and you can see a fossil of a fish's skeleton. It's pretty cool looking. Today, amphibians live everywhere on Earth except Antarctica. Because these cold-blooded vertebrates depend on moisture to live, many of them live in tropical rainforest or near rivers, lakes, and streams. Amphibians that live in cold climates become dormant as their bodies slow down in winter, burrowing deep underground or burying themselves in the top layer of mud at the bottom of ponds to stay warm. Remember what that's called? I'm blanking on what that's called. Estivate, right? They're estivating. Dormant amphibians hibernate, living off stored energy for months at a time. Next time we meet, you will learn all about the way scientists classify snakes like anaconda. I'll give you a hint. Remember when I said that salamanders are often mistaken for lizards, but that lizards belong to a different group of animals? Well, Anna belongs to the same group as lizards. Does anyone want to predict the name of that group? Wait and see if you're right. For now, I want to congratulate you all on being good sleuths or detectives. Any taxonomists would love to have your help in classifying Earth's animals. See you soon. So were your predictions correct about how amphibians and fish are similar or different? Why or why not? So amphibians live partly on land and partly in the water. Many amphibians begin life underwater, and as they grow, they live mostly on land. So that's different from fish, right? Living on land, except for when we learned about the lungfish that can survive on land, but most fish can't, right? How are amphibians and fish alike, and how are they different? Both begin life underwater, breathe using gills, reproduce by laying eggs, and are cold-blooded vertebrates. Amphibians live on land and in water, whereas fish live entirely in water. Amphibians' gills develop into lungs. What do we mean when we say amphibians morph? They change or transform from one stage of life to the next, so their bodies actually change. In what longer word can the shortened word morph be found? Metamorphosis. Do you think it is likely that an amphibian would shed its skin when it is going through metamorphosis? Why? Or why not? Yes, as amphibians are going through this period of change, they shed their skin so they can grow. In the read aloud, you heard that an amphibian's body temperature fluctuates. What does this mean? What does the word fluctuate mean? It shifts back and forth. It changes. It's not constant, like warm-blooded animals. Knowing that their temperatures fluctuate, what does that tell you about whether amphibians are cold-blooded or warm-blooded animals? They are cold-blooded because their body temperatures are not constant. They shift depending on the surroundings. After toads become adults and live on dry land, why do they go back to the wetlands every spring? What brings them back there? They go there to lay their eggs because their eggs need to be moist. In the read aloud, you heard that in places that get very cold, some amphibians bury themselves underground and become dormant. What is meant by the word dormant? What do you think dormant means? Existing in a state of rest or inactivity. Do you remember when Mr. Badger was hibernating and he went off and really didn't do much and sat by himself and went to sleep? He was being dormant. Why is this important for these animals? It helps them keep from freezing or drying out. In the read aloud today, you also learned that a tadpole, a type of baby amphibian, breathes through gills like fish because it lives primarily underwater. How do adult frogs breathe? That's right, with lungs and through their skin. What do we mean when we say that scientists study fossils to learn more about how amphibians may have evolved? They are trying to learn how the animals may have changed slowly over a very long period of time. Write 2 or 3 complete sentences that identify the major characteristics of amphibians. Well, we know amphibians are cold-blooded. They live in and out of water, and they lay eggs. What else do we know about them? As background information before the read aloud, you learned that the word amphibian means living 2 lives or 2 worlds. Describe the transformation amphibians go through in their lifetimes. Be sure to discuss the first part of life and what makes it so different from the second part of life. How do they change? Well, the first part of life is when the egg hatches and a tadpole is born. This is the larva stage. Then the tadpole morphs and begins to enter the second part of life. Its gills slowly become lungs and its tail slowly grows into legs. It has now transformed from a water animal to a land animal. Our word of the day is shed. In the read aloud, you heard most frogs, toads, and salamanders molt or shed their skins, often eating their own skin for extra nutrients. Again, gross. Shed means to drop, cast off, or separate from something. If you shed your rain jacket, you are taking it off. When an animal sheds its skin, the skin peels away from its body. All right. Good job, guys. I hope you enjoyed learning about amphibians. We will fill out our classification chart together on Monday. So make sure you remember what you learned about amphibians.